This Sunbracer's build will give you infinite healing, infinite grenades, and a constant 25% damage buff. I took a different angle in this video than most because every variation I tried in the past had these gaps I'd fall short on. So let's start with that infinite healing I just showed you because it's something called Restoration. It heals you at 65 HP per second, and it's not like regular recovery that stops when you take damage. This will keep going under fire. The way we can achieve this is through the heat rises aspect, and I want you to think of that aspect as having two layers, okay? The first layer is the fact that it's just on all the time providing passive benefits. We're going to get into those throughout the video, but layer number 2 is when you consume your grenade by holding its button down. The first thing that happens when you do that is an instant 120 health, which is called 2 stacks of cure. Any teammates within 9 meters will get it as well. The second thing is the heat rises timer on the left hand side. Using Phoenix Dive while that's up procs restoration, which is your infinite healing. We can extend that timer forever and do a lot more when I show you the gameplay loop. Moving on to the second piece that I show you is infinite grenades. You're going to be using solar grenades because that's what the Sunbracer's exotic is all about, and it's split into 2 mechanics. The first one is the fact that it increases how long grenades stay up. At base, a solar grenade will only last 4 seconds, but the Sunbracers will double that for 8. Because this build revolves around grenades so much, we're going to apply the Touch of Flame aspect to enhance those grenades even more. Doing so will bump it up to 10 seconds, as well as adding these lava blob looking things that deal extra damage. Now onto the real juice for the exotic is the second part, which is that a powered melee kill will proc those infinite grenades. You're going to be using the Incinerator Snap melee to do this. It shoots out 5 sparks, and each of them deal a base damage plus a burn over time called Scorch. The moment you get a kill with that, it'll show Sunbracers ready on the left hand side for 5 seconds. The unlimited grenades thing is because during those 5 seconds, they actually charge 20,000% faster, meaning you can throw up to 5 grenades back to back to back. Now, something that a lot of new players don't realize is that you don't have to start throwing nades right away. That initial timer is just to indicate to you that you're ready for your unlimited grenades. It won't actually start until you throw or eat the first one. In this example, I can wait till it's almost run out and then throw my grenade and it'll reset right back to the 5-second mark. And some advice on this is that you don't have to throw all 5 grenades. Like, you can just throw 4 of them and then keep your final charge for when the perk is gone. The third concept I showed at the beginning was a 25% damage buff, right? Well, that, my friends, is called Radiant. Thanks to the Ember of Torches fragment, using that powered melee we just talked about will make you Radiant. There's no kill required either, it's that simple. Literally just deal damage with it and you have your 25% damage buff. It applies to all weapons, it has intrinsic anti-barrier rounds, and it applies to all your nearby teammates when you activate it too. At base, it'll last for 8 seconds, but we really like this buff, so we're going to use Ember of Solace to juice that up to 12. Something you'll learn in the gameplay loop is the fact that you can actually just keep it going forever though. So let's talk about that, because understanding those 3 core concepts is key to maintaining the build cycle, and there's sort of 2 routes that you can take with this, so I'm just going to call them option A and option B. The first would be the fact that you can just melee to proc Sunbracers, throw a bunch of grenades, eat one of them like we discussed to get that heat rises timer up on screen, then Phoenix Dive to get restoration going, which is your infinite healing. There's some really important things that you do and don't want to do within that cycle that we're going to talk about, but option B is kind of just like the reverse order. You sometimes want to start with your infinite healing, but then if you do that, there's this added step where you really have to consciously focus on getting a solar kill immediately. I'm going to talk all about why this added step exists, but let's walk you through that cycle, starting out with a melee kill to proc Sunbracers. It seems really easy on paper, just find an enemy, melee them, and bam. But it can be a lot less obvious in harder content. You're not going to walk up to a beefy enemy and just one-hit melee them. This is where we utilize a term called priming or chip damage. You prime the enemy by making them weak with a weapon or ability first, and then you get the melee afterwards to confirm the kill. I can just shoot this into a group of tougher adds, which will blind them, helping me get closer while dealing chip damage to prime their health, and then I'm totally good for my melee kill. If the melee doesn't one-hit them, you don't need to panic because it might still be fine thanks to Incinerator applying that Scorch burn that I told you about earlier. They will often still die to that burn and proc Sunbracers anyway, it just might be a little bit delayed. Something else to be aware of, by the way, is how most people use the auto melee keybind, and this applies to consoles too. When you're point blank to an enemy, the game will prioritize the punch. I have a specific keybind for both charged and uncharged melees if I really need to make sure that I'm going to actually incinerate them instead of punch them when they're up close to me. Now at this point, if you've secured that powered melee kill for Sunbracers ready, it's time for steps 2, 3, and 4. The key here is just remembering that if you're starting your cycle, you're going to want to eat one of them. I sometimes throw 3 grenades and then eat my 4th. Sometimes I'll eat the first one. It just depends on how hard the content is and if I need my healing immediately. Steps 3 and 4 say to eat one of those grenades to get the 15-second heat rises timer and then dive down to get your healing going. Well, you have plenty of time to dive down and get restoration started after eating your grenade. In fact, a passive benefit to the heat rises aspect is that kills while midair will extend it up to 30 seconds, so it's incredibly easy to keep that up. The mistake when you first try out this build is doing step 4 immediately. You'll find you want to dive down right away and forget about the rest, which is why I had options A and B to show you that extra solar kill step. This was intentional because when you start your dive animation, it's gonna proc restoration on the first frame, not when you land on the ground. At base, you only have 3 seconds of it, which seems pretty useless, but there's 2 things here. Number 1 is the Ember of Solace fragment, which will bump that up to 5 seconds, and this helps, but number 2 is running the Empyrean fragment. That is the whole key here around why I have that solar kill step, because it allows you to extend the restoration timer all the way up to 12 seconds and keep refreshing it infinitely by getting solar kills. Now in option A, because you started out by getting the exotic going, you've just finished throwing a bunch of grenades, right? So when you dive down, those are going to get you the solar kill in the background the moment you start that animation. It feels like you instantly have 12 seconds in that scenario. But for option B, when you start the cycle by eating a grenade first, well, in that case, you don't have sunbracers going, so you must focus on getting a solar kill immediately. Use whatever you need. It can be the solar weapon or heck, even the snap melee. That's going to be a solar kill and that'll get your sunbracers going, right? And with that out of the way, I'm actually coming on screen right now. Hi there. Yep, I want to talk about 2 common mistakes that you're definitely going to run into as a beginner. The first one is spamming your dive like way too much. Diving is great because it gives you a health bump, plus it activates restoration like we just went through, right? But if you do it too much, you're actually going to screw yourself. If you already have restoration, let's say it's sitting at 11 or 12 seconds, and then you dive, the game resets it back to its default 5 seconds. So you could be in the middle of a cycle and not even realize that you've cut yourself down to 5 and lose it. The reason why this isn't a bad thing is because it just goes to show that you don't need your dive very much. You just need it to get things going. And then after that, you just grenade, melee. It's a beautiful thing. But the second tendency that you're going to have when you're testing this build out is being in the air way too much. Because midair kills do so much, like extending the heat rises timer or even giving you a bunch of melee energy back, people tend to treat it like an AC 130, but that's not really ideal. All you want to do are these like little hops. You'll see what I mean with some gameplay, but you basically get into this rhythm of just kind of bouncing around. So there's a part of the new dungeon where there's like infinite enemies, okay? And I went in there and I decided to play with one style and then play again with the correct style. And I really want you to pay attention to the timers and how one half just totally messes up my cycle and the other half has a much better hop going with much better cycle. But while you're doing that, I'm also going to thank today's sponsor, which is Manscaped. I've had their trimmer for about a year now, and I love this thing. It's called the Lawnmower 4.0, all right? And it's intended for like, you know, down there. If you've never done this before, your partner will thank you. Or if you play sports and you hop in the showers afterwards, you know, you're gonna feel a lot more comfortable. But mainly, I just want to talk about how good their advanced skin-safe technology is, all right? Like I used to nick myself all the time with my old trimmers. Not anymore. It has never happened in a full year of using these. I love that it's waterproof. I can do this in the shower. It works great. It even has this like light. It's got like a spotlight thing. It's amazing, and that actually makes a big difference. I happen to have a 20% sale right now if you want to take advantage of this by using the code Castle Content. But I also want to talk about the bundles they have because those discounts will stack with mine, kind of like the game. And you can get a really good deal. I personally got the perfect package. It'll come with a shaving kit like this thing. I just use this on every trip that I go. It also comes with boxers, which I thought was kind of whatever, but they fit amazing. I seriously cannot recommend enough. Like this thing is incredible and you can get a big savings right now if you pile that on with my code Castle Content. But the gameplay, I hope that helps showing the difference side by side and how you really don't need to spam dive or eat your grenades too much, which I think is a really good segue into all of the mod synergies and why I think this is the best way you can run this build. I also figured a concrete way to run through these and have you remember them is by talking about actual scenarios. Like let's just say you run out of your melee. What do you do? Well, for starters, think about those mid-air kills I just talked to you about. Each one will give you anywhere from 20 to 50% depending on the enemy tier for every kill. Method number 2 to think about is the searing fragment. Every time you kill a scorched target, you're going to get up to 25% of your melee back as well. No need to be midair here, just a constant while you're burning the entire map. The third way to get your melee back is having invigoration on your boots. This will give you 10% on every orb you pick up. Why will there be orbs? Well, you're going to be running firepower on your gauntlets, which generate orbs on all of those grenade kills because there's such an endless supply. Number 4 is having momentum transfer on your gauntlets as well. This one will give you 20% of your melee back on simply dealing grenade damage. You don't even need a kill. Like the instant it deals damage, just bam, 20% back. That sounds overpowered, but there is a 7-second cooldown to balance that out. The final method is running outreach on your class item so that whenever you do Phoenix Dive, you're going to get 20% of your melee back. With those 5 out of the way, what about when you run out of grenades? Step number 1, don't panic. Just remember that as long as you can get sunbracers going, you're going to get grenades back in an instant. You can even run low discipline, by the way, like 50 is plenty. Don't worry about going over that. And it is worth mentioning that you're going to have 2 Ashes to Assets mods on your helmet because of how many grenade kills you're going to be getting. Stacking 2 of these give you up to 600% more super than a regular grenade depending on the enemy tier. Now, how about the Phoenix Dive? What happens when you run out of that? Well, firstly, you'll be running Bolstering Detonation on your gauntlets to get 20% of your dive back on those grenade hits as well. It also has a cooldown mechanic, just like the Momentum Transfer one, but as you can imagine, with all the nade spam, it's fine. Method number 2 to making sure you have your dive is having a Kickstart mod on your class item. What this does is give you a bunch of energy back just for literally using your dive. So the moment you go to activate that restoration, for example, you're going to get some of your dive energy back. This mod synergizes a lot with the armor charge system, and I've explained this in depth on prior videos, but here's a quick summary. Whenever you walk over orbs, you get armor charges. See how it shows 3 blue squares on the left-hand side? Well, the more charges you have when you dive down, the more energy you get back. Diving when I have 3 gives me 30% back, and it's amazing because even if you have 0 charges, the Kickstart mod still gives you 12% back. To round out the rest of the build, here are some key mods working in the background. On your class item, you want Powerful Attraction. If you remember, thanks to firepower, your grenades are making a ton of orbs, right? Well, what Powerful Attraction does is pick all of them up the moment you dive, and the best part is that it's instant upon activation. It's not delayed to when you land. But moving on, we have a heavy ammo mod on your helmet. That one's always handy for people who aren't too used to running double special. For your chest piece, you can run whatever you want, but I highly recommend resist mods if it's a harder difficulty. And then for the boots, you have 2 empty slots that I like to run Harmonic Scavenger and a Solar Holster. For anyone new, Harmonic Scav is identical to a regular Scav, just cheaper if it matches your subclass. So in this case, it'll work for solar ammo. You can do whatever you feel is best here, but these just allow me to run a lot more of an aggressive and quick playstyle. Last up is the weapons and champions, which I've put together a Venn diagram thanks to a buddy of mine, so don't laugh, okay? It's gonna make sense. Your 3 weapons should aim to satisfy these 3 objectives: an in-air workhorse for the heat rises benefits, a heavy hitter for damage output, and a primer for that chip damage we talked about. We know that we need to get solar kills to extend the restoration and radiant timers, so ideally one of these would be solar, but it's even better when you can get weapons to cover more than one category. For example, a good in-air workhorse is something that will kill quickly. That could be a shotgun or maybe a fusion, but wave frames also work amazing because not only can you slam it down in the air without aiming, they're great for priming enemies. Explosive Personality hits 2 of our categories, plus it's solar. Cartesian Coordinate works really well. The Riptide Fusion might not be solar, but it still comes in handy thanks to Chill Clip for champions, which we're going to discuss in a moment. And then for heavy hitters, there's a ton of options, most of them being in the heavy slot. I've thrown up a bunch of common ones on screen, but I wanted to shout out the shotguns with the Surrounded perk. That's a 47% damage buff just for being around enemies, like it's super easy to have at all times. And then to go one step further, the Conditional Finality is incredible. You know how it's got the 2 barrels for solar and stasis? Well, both shots will actually count as solar and extend your timers. The third category is that primer, right? Now in easy content, you might not really worry about this. It's mostly for harder content that I touched on earlier. Disorienting Grenades is a great perk for this on a GL, something that does chip damage or possibly the weapon that you choose to stun whatever champions you need to focus on for that activity. And finally, an honorable mention is the Incandescent perk. That spreads Scorch to other enemies when you get a kill, so it has beautiful synergy with this build. When it comes to champions, they obviously influence your loadout when it comes to the activity, depending on whether or not you're solo or in a team, but here are some things to consider. Anti-barrier isn't something you need to focus on much from a weapons perspective because when you're Radiant, you have that covered. For unstops, there's 2 methods outside of seasonal mods. Number 1 is the Chill Clip perk on fusion rifles. All it takes is 2 shots from the top of the mag, and it can be done from super far away because it's the shatter damage from when you break them out that stuns them. Then number 2 is your snap melee. You know how it sends out 5 sparks? Well, if all 5 of them happen to hit an enemy, they'll ignite, which also stuns an unstoppable. For overloads, I figured I'd just mention that you can still stun them with slow, so that same chill clip fusion will work with them. You just have to be careful, because if you're radiant while you do it, it won't work, and that's because the game prioritizes the anti-barrier over overload in this case. Finally, for all enemies, including champions, remember that your finisher counts as a solar kill, so that'll extend all of your timers, restoration, radiant, and heat rises if you happen to be in the air. This wraps up our build, and I've paid an amazing artist named Rocket Biscuits to whip this up for you. Share it with your friends, hopefully it helps, and if you happen to be a Titan, by the way, I've got 2 builds just as good as this one on screen to watch next.